Hi, I'm Ryan Boyd, and today we're going to do a quick tutorial on how to do some advanced lemmatization for non-English texts. So in a previous tutorial, I went through very quickly how to use some of the features of Mean Extraction Helper to do a bunch of different types of text pre-processing for your frequency list. So this included the use of stop lists, this included lemmatization and conversions. Now I mentioned in that previous tutorial that for lemmatization there are several lemmatizers that are built in for non-English text. So this includes things like a Czech lemmatizer, a French lemmatizer, and so forth. But of course this does not include lemmatizers for all languages. Now you may be wondering, what if my text is not in English or one of these lemmatizers are covered here? I still need to do lemmatization. I still need to take all these different forms of words and convert them to the basic inflections. So this tutorial is going to very quickly cover how you can do that for texts in a language that's not handled by the lemmatizer. Now for this example, I'm going to be working with the same TED Talks dataset that I talked about before. Now in this file that I have here, I have transcripts for several TED Talks, both in English, as you can see here, as well as German. Now, while the Mean Extraction Helper does include a lematizer for the German language, Deutsch, you can use the same method for any type of text that is in a language, whether it's handled by the lematizer that's built in or not. So what I'm going to do quickly is set up the basic settings. So we're going to tell the Mean Extraction Helper where our input file is. I'm going to choose the file name as the row identifier. I'm going to choose the German transcripts as the text column. And I'm going to let it know that we want to put the output files right in this folder. Now I don't speak German, so if you do, some of the stuff I'm doing here, you may see some results that aren't that great. That's entirely my fault. I don't know the language whatsoever, aside from, some of the basics like Kartoffel for potato and so forth. So, I don't really know how to evaluate this without speaking the language that you're trying to analyze. I would recommend collaborating with or talking to a native speaker just so they can help you to make sure that your results make sense. Now, by default, the Mean Extraction Helper is set up to work with English texts. So we're going to go through some of these tabs and just make sure that we're changing things to the right settings for the language that we're working with. So the conversions list by default is English. Now for any type of language that is not handled by the lemmatizer under token handling options, there are ways that we can use this conversion list to do the lemmatization for us. And what you can see is there's this big list of languages here where we have what's called a lemma lookup list. So this is a way to manually lemmatize your texts. Now thankfully you won't actually have to do the manual lemmatization yourself because these lemmatizers are built in for most of these languages. And it's very easy to find additional lemma lookup lists for other languages that are not handled by default in the mean extraction method. So I'm going to set this to the German lemma lookup list. And I'm going to go ahead and load these conversions. And you'll notice a few things are going to happen when I load this manual lemma lookup list. You'll notice from the previous tutorial what this is doing is it's using the conversions list to convert various forms of different words into their most basic inflections. So this is not using an algorithm to do it like the other lemmatizers that are built into Mean Extraction Helper, but it accomplishes the same task. Now you also notice that this checkbox has been checked automatically, the use lookup method for conversions. When you're using this type of approach, you want to make sure that this checkbox is checked because it changes the way that the conversion list works. If you have this unchecked, more than likely the program is going to get choked up on all the different things it's trying to do. This makes the Mean Extraction Helper using a much simpler method of doing the conversions list that will be faster and more accurate. What this also means is that the conversions that were mentioned before, where you can use things like wildcards, for example, this will no longer work when this is checked. You can only have exact matches for the lookup method. Now for the stop list, this will work just like it did before. So I'm going to go ahead and choose the German language stop list and click load to make sure that it loads up the German stop list. We don't want to use the English stop list for another language. And lastly, under the token handling options, you'll notice that when we loaded that conversions list, the lemma lookup list, this box has now been unchecked. So we're no longer going to use the automatic or the automated lemmatization that's built in when we're also using this lemma lookup list. This helps make sure that we're not doing, we're not taking the texts and then running them through an algorithm to do lemmatization for some other language, and then also applying this lemma lookup list to it. Since this is unchecked, it doesn't matter what language is chosen here because we're not actually going to run the text through the lemmatizer. And I'm going to go ahead and leave these all as they are for now. I'm going to leave these alone, and I'm going to go ahead and run this analysis. And what we see is that it's doing everything that's done in the previous tutorials. We're getting our document word list. Soon it's going to give us our frequency list and other types of output. But it will be doing this all for the German language. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up. And just as a note, often depending on the version of Excel that you're using and depending on your computer, the file encoding is going to be in UTF-8. So what you want to do when you're loading these files in Excel to make sure that they're reading properly is load them in not by double-clicking and having it open up, but by manually specifying some of the details of your file. So I'm going to go ahead and open Excel, go to Data, from a text or CSV file. I'm going to go ahead and choose our frequency list, and you'll notice we'll get some different prompts here. So it recognizes that this is a UTF-8 file. A lot of times, especially if you're in the United States or other countries, you may have a different encoding selected by default, like US ASCII or Windows 1252 encoding, but the output was in UTF-8 format, so we just want to make sure that we're choosing the right encoding so that we don't get a bunch of jumbled or weird characters when we load up this data set. And so I'm going to go ahead and sort this from high to low. And what you'll see is that this should be a frequency list of German words. Lemmatization should have been performed. And if you remember back to one of the previous tutorials, if you run into cases where the lemmatization from the conversions list, this lookup method of lemmatization, if there are words that did not correctly lemmatize, you can add those in here. Now for the most part, if you have words that are really uncommon, so all the way down at the bottom of our list, that were not captured or were not lemmatized properly, it doesn't really matter. You don't need to worry about really uncommon words that were not lemmatized properly, because we're going to drop those later for analyses anyways. But it looks pretty good to me. Again, as someone who does not read or speak German whatsoever, it seems like it did a pretty good job. And that is how you use the lemma lookup list to do lemmatization in non-English languages, and in particular languages for which there's not a built-in lemmatizer that uses some kind of an algorithmic approach using the main extraction helper.